Avi, thank you for coming back and joining me again. It's an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
You know, I thought a lot about our episode when we spoke last, and one of the distinct aspects of this is that when you spoke about going out and looking for civilizations, ones that happen to exist but are no longer there, looking for their relics, looking for their artifacts. Maybe it might be on Mars, right? Or some other distant planet, or maybe even a meteor. What I was considering was the fact was, why did they disappear? Why are the relics there? And then I figured, well, how is it that we guarantee our own preservation so that if someone does come looking for us, vice versa, that they don't just find the relics, they actually find people still living and breathing, living, interacting, going about our lives. And I've been thinking about that. That's something I was just like, how do I consider it? I felt like Rodin, the person you have in the background, the statue of, you know?
Yes. Well, we should keep in mind that our recorded history was only of 10,000 years, and
Right.
that's a very short time. It takes 50,000 years for us to travel to the nearest star with chemical rockets. We should have launched that rocket back when the first humans left Africa in order for it to arrive right now. So the distances are vast, the timescales are long. And when Enrico Fermi said, "Where is everybody?" that was quite presumptuous, because the assumption was that if we wait for someone to knock on our door and we don't hear a knock, and if we don't see anyone partying in our backyard, that means that we have no neighbors. But that's
Right.
the wrong assumption, because you just have to wait. Maybe in a million years, someone will knock on your door. Maybe in a billion years, someone will come and visit you. And you know, the last time they checked the Earth, there might have been microbes around or dinosaurs, but nobody really cared about their visit. So the point to keep in mind is the time scales and the length scales involved, and the fact that most stars form billions of years before the sun. So it's not, their existence was not synchronized with ours, not just in terms of when we started our intelligence, so to speak, a million years ago, but also in terms of our exact technological phase right now. You know, we develop radio transmitters, we are listening in some electromagnetic bands. Now we just constructed the gravitational wave detector and so forth. But they may have done that a million years ago, a billion years ago, and by now they're doing something else. So if at all, maybe they perished. So the whole point is, the play is not about us. You know, we are born into this world as actors put on a stage, and we have no script, and we tend to think that the play is about us. And we did it many times before. You know, we thought that we're at the center of the universe. Turns out, no, we're not, even though the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle asserted that, and people believed him for 1,000 years because it flattered their ego. And also, if you look at the Mayans, you know, I visited Chichen Itza in Mexico, and I learned during the visit that, in fact, the Mayans had the astronomers at the highest societal level. They were called astronomers priests. I wish we had the same status in the American society. We don't have that as astronomers. But why did they have such a high status? Because their data was important for political decisions, because back then they believed in astrology, and they believed that the locations of the planets affect human actions. You know, so you can forecast the outcome of a war based on the location of Venus, the sun, and other things. And that gave a higher status in the society to the astronomers that could measure those locations. And again, the thought was, you know, it's all about us. But guess what? It's not about us. And in fact, there was just a few days ago, there was a new article published in Nature magazine arguing that perhaps the city of Sodom, you know, in Sodom and Gomorrah in the Bible, the biblical story, was destroyed by a meteor. So a group of archaeologists went there and realized that there is pottery that was melted with temperatures above 1400 degrees Kelvin, and all kinds of other side effects from a fireball. an air bath that usually results from a meteor similar to the Tunguska meteor that bolide that in Russia, in Siberia, that flattened the whole forest without creating a crater. So the idea is that there is this Tal El Hammam in between the Dead Sea and the Jordan River going to the Sea of Galilee, and that about 2600 years BC, there was a meteor that impacted that region, and it was roughly the time that Abraham and Lot in the biblical story existed. And so the idea is that people back then said, oh, it's all triggered by the sins of the people in that city. But in fact, this event may have been just a meteor that happened to strike the location of that city, Sodom. And the point is, it's not about us. That's what because this rock was heading for a collision course with Earth long before this city was constructed, long before people contemplated conducting these sins for which they were, quote unquote, punished. So if you believe in free will, otherwise there is no point in punishing people, right? If they don't have free will. So if you believe in free will because people do bad things and they need to be punished, these actions of the people were decided upon, long after this piece of rock was heading towards Earth to collide with it. So it has nothing to do. And again, it's this view that it's all about us. And nowadays the view is, okay, we are not at the center of the universe. We know that by observing the universe. Moreover, we know that the play has started 13.8 billion years ago, since the Big Bang. So the play is not about us really, but perhaps we are still the most intelligent species out there. And again, this sign of arrogance, saying, okay, we don't have extraordinary evidence to the contrary, let's just assume that we are special and unique. Once again. And the same was said about Earth being rare. We now know from the Kepler satellite data that the Earth is not rare. At least, half of the sun-like stars have a planet the size of the Earth, roughly at the same separation. So at least in terms of arranging this planetary configuration of an Earth-Sun system, that's not unusual. Once again, nature tells us over and over again, you are not special. You are not the main actor in this play. But we keep going back to it. And now the only thing left is to argue, okay, maybe everything around us is not special, but we are special in the sense that we are the only intelligent species out there. And please give me extraordinary evidence to the contrary before I would even engage in a discussion that there might be another technological civilization out there. And anyone discussing that is being ridiculed. So I ask you, how many times can we make that mistake? And obviously we're heading towards another Copernican revolution where we would realize that there is a smarter kid on the block. It will happen. Mm-hmm. There is no doubt about it. It happened so many times before that we thought we are at the center of the play and we are not main. So my point is, let's be modest. Let's start from the assumption that there is nothing special about us. And let's figure out if there are other actors out there. Maybe they have been around for longer than we do. And maybe they know, what the purpose or the sense of this. What is a better perspective about this play that we are engaged in? And I think that's the nature of science, to look for evidence rather than have a prejudice. But we keep coming back to our ego. I think that's really the source of all evil. Yes.
So do you think that when reviewing Chichen Itza, or even the biblical times of Sodom, that when we look at our preservation of civilizations, because we are not the greatest cosmic actor in terms of things that are happening, and some things are outside of our own power, do we need to look at not eradicating our ego, but essentially keeping it in check so that it allows for the evolution of our technology, for the state of who we are, understanding of others, and even the preservation of our civilizations, not only on this planet, but hopefully in the future when we choose to leave this planet. Don't you think
Definitely.
that that is probably a large scientific, wall for us that we have to get past is our own egos in terms of that understanding? Because if we can't understand ourselves and keep our own egos in check, well, then how am I supposed to understand you, Avi, or anyone
Yes.
else? Or, for instance, maybe an extraterrestrial visitor that may show up, right? I limit myself to that data because I'm blinding my perspective.
That's an excellent point. And if you look at human history, what you find over and over again are groups of people trying to feel superior relative to other people. Again, the root of all evil. And the reason, for example, the Second World War, there were 75 million people killed as a result of the Nazi regime feeling superior relative to other people. And that's that was 3% of the world population in 1940. It's 20 times more than the number of deaths triggered so far by the COVID-19 pandemic that we keep talking about for a year and a half. So just imagine a group of people deciding to feel superior, triggering more deaths than COVID-19 by a factor of 20. And um, uh, my point is, if we instead become modest, if we, for example, if we all stare with awe at a piece of technology that is far more advanced than we ever produced, if we find that there is a smarter kid on the block, it will make all of our genetic differences insignificant, meaningless, and the foundation for a doctrine like the Nazi doctrine will lose meaning, and we will perhaps have more respect towards each other and regard all of us as equal members of the human species, because there is a smarter kid on the block. So how can you brag if there is someone much better than you are? And that's similar to what my daughters went through when they were young. They were at home and they thought very highly of themselves. But once we took them to the kindergarten, they met other kids. And I very much see a parallel there, that our civilization has to mature by meeting others.
So, do you feel that when we have technologies like Kepler, like Hubble, or deep radio telescope technology, that as we look out as an extension of our senses and actually see things that may be like, wait a minute, something is going on here. Maybe there is something beyond our understanding, right? That should actually keep us in check. So that through that extension, through that realization, that data that's received by looking out into the cosmos, when we internally reflect on it, it allows us to help preserve ourselves and everyone else through that understanding. It allows us to
Right.
put ourselves in check. Is that how I would understand that?
Yeah, but that's as long as we allow ourselves to discover new things. You see, the astronomy so far had been about physical objects that are lifeless.
Mm-hmm.
That has been astronomy. So, we discovered stars, we discovered black holes, the cosmic microwave background from the Big Bang, so radiation and matter. We even discovered dark matter. We don't know what it's made of, but we think it's some other type of matter. So all of these are dead things, things that do not have life in them. And the claim is we need extraordinary evidence before we will engage in a discussion about extraterrestrial life. And,
Mm.
that's the conventional wisdom. And I say, well, we see ourselves here on Earth. We see that there are tens of billions of uh, Earth-like planets out there in the Milky Way galaxy alone, and circumstances are similar. So why wouldn't we expect to get similar outcomes? That's common sense to me. That's much less of a stretch or an extrapolation than talking about extra dimensions, which are
Right.
part of the mainstream in physics. Talking about the superstring multiverse and the landscape that has no evidence in its support. It's just a sandbox for intellectual gymnastics that demonstrates that you're smart. And so I find that really remarkable that in the current intellectual landscape of academia, that the concepts that are extremely speculative, that have no foundation in reality, are being celebrated as part of the mainstream, and people give each other awards just because they decided that this is a subject they should talk about, just like deciding about how many angels can sit on the tip of a pin, and
Right.
in 10 dimensions. You can decide that and then argue about the mathematics that will describe it in the best way. And we can all be happy talking about it, just like there are religious cults that talk about things that they believe in. I mean, you can build a big enough community that will believe in something, but you won't expect it in academia. At least in the science, you expect, the guillotine to be the experimental evidence. And if there is no experimental evidence, that should be pushed to the sidelines of the mainstream. Instead, this is celebrated. Whereas when we talk about things like us that may exist on other planets that have conditions, at least on the surface, similar to Earth,
Someone's
that
like,
is
that's unreasonable. Yeah. No,
yeah, because yeah, and the other thing is, think about Perseverance, the rover on Mars right now. It's searching for possible evidence that perhaps there were microbes on Mars, and of course, we can still feel superior relative to microbes. Okay, we will discover microbes. We'll give the Nobel Prize to whoever finds direct evidence for it, but we will still be happy because microbes are inferior to us. They are not intelligent. But just imagine a situation where the Perseverance rover bumps against the wreckage of a spaceship far more advanced than we ever produced. That will be a blow to our ego. And a lot of people will get upset and will argue, oh, we need extraordinary evidence. We are not sure about it. And my point is, that's not the way science should be done. Just like we search for dark matter, we've been searching for 4 decades. We invested hundreds of millions of dollars looking for specific types of particles, haven't found them. Nobody says, oh, that's a big failure of science. Okay, let's search for technological equipment by other civilizations in space. For 4 decades, let's invest hundreds of millions of dollars, and in 40 years, we will be in the same place where the search for dark matter is right now. So I'm saying dark matter search is part of the mainstream. The search for technological equipment from other civilizations is not. In 40 years, if you invest hundreds of millions of dollars, we will be at the same place as the dark matter search is right now. And the point is, how can that be ridiculed? How can people argue that you need extraordinary evidence before even engaging in the search or investing funds in the search? There was no scientific project to search for equipment from other civilizations. The first one is the Galileo project that I established in July, just a couple of months ago, based on a few multi-billionaires that came to the porch of my home and offered me in total $2 million in research funds because they were intrigued by my book, Extraterrestrial. And so this is really the first project, and I recruited about 70 scientists that are very enthusiastic about it, exceptional, mostly astronomers, and we are now selecting the instruments, and we'll build those observational facilities that would search for equipment from other civilizations. But it's really the very first time that a search of this type is pursued. And I ask you, how is that possible? I mean, it makes no sense. This should have been part of the mainstream as early as the search for dark matter was part, or even before that. And instead, right now, it's being ridiculed. And I basically, when I wrote my book, I said, I'll bring money to science that was previously not allocated to science. And I will attract people to science that were not previously interested, because this is an exciting subject. And I rest my case. The Galileo project brought new funds that were not allocated to dark matter search or any other scientific project. And I got thousands of emails from people that were excited and willing to contribute from their expertise.
Yeah, I find this interesting. So when I look at science and when individuals are doing superstring theory and using mathematics of some sort of experimental nature to describe something completely hypothetical that can't be seen, it's like we've gone so far out on a limb that we have essentially lost ourselves from what we should be looking for, and that's the real obvious. And when I understand this and the way you speak of it is like, why don't we just use our research to look for things that we would have done. If we look at our own path of evolution, maybe that path of evolution is also shared by others. Regardless of where they are in that path, it should be out there. Probability states that. But there's nothing that is probable about supersymmetry. That's someone coming up with an idea to help explain mathematics that are otherwise unfinished. And so when I think we come back to the natural aspects of it and look to the evolution and really begin to realize that when we look at the solar system or the universe as we understand it, it does not tout a hierarchy. But that sort of research, those ideas have a hierarchy which create what you're trying to follow and trying to champion, and they try and make that a non-starter. They try and pull the attention away from what I would see is inherently obvious. And your task is one that I see as looking for that data that allows for a preservation of our society, because it does check our egos. It does remove that idea of hierarchy. It does show us that there is more beyond what we are doing. We are just in this course of cosmic evolution over here on the edge of our galaxy itself. We're not even in the direct center of it. So why would you call yourself the center of the universe? You're not even the center of your own galaxy, you know? So when I think about those illogics, it's like, why is it that there's such a continued focus on these things that really don't bring understanding to human beings and our own evolution?
Exactly. No, I mean that you are stating it precisely the way I see it. Basically, the way I see it is that I use common sense. I'm a couple of days ago, I received an invitation to participate in a forum, a discussion forum, and they put the titles before my name. And I said, look, I'm not about titles. I don't care about my titles. As far as I'm concerned, you just put my name and say a farm boy, because I was born on a farm. And what I'm trying to use is common sense. You see, I was not groomed into academia the way many of my colleagues were, in which they feel very privileged to be on a pedestal and not necessarily engage in what the public cares about. That's not what motivates me. I'm trying to understand the world. As a kid, that was my main motivation, and so it's really foreign to me, this self-centered approach where you are trying to just demonstrate that you are smart and doing intellectual gymnastics for the benefit of getting honors and awards, which is pretty much the way that academia is constructed these days. And I find it, okay, well, you might say it's part of reality. That's the way people behave. But the problem with this subject that we are discussing is that the question here is of great importance to the future of humanity. And the scientific community is just on the wrong side. So it's not a small shift from where it's supposed to be. It's 180 degrees, the opposite place of where it's supposed to be. And that's why I feel so strongly about it. And that's why when I express myself, I get so much pushback from people, and there's so much hate on social media sometimes, just because I'm advocating for something that takes people out of their comfort zone. And they're afraid to discuss it and they don't want to deal with it. And I just don't understand that, because to me it sounds like, if you go back 1,000 years, there were people arguing that the human body has a soul and therefore anatomy should be forbidden. And imagine if the science community would say, this is a controversial subject, there is nonsense being said about it, just like people say about unidentified flying objects. There is a lot of nonsense in the science fiction literature and so forth. We don't want to engage in that. Imagine where modern medicine would be if we didn't operate humans, just because there was this nonsense being said about it 1,000 years. So to me, it makes much more sense for scientists to engage in topics that are of interest to the public, because they are of existential relevance to people. For example, COVID-19, if we find a vaccine, that helps society, that's important. It's a service to the rest of humanity. The same is true about the question, are we alone? Are we the smartest kid on the block? That's a question that everyone is interested in. So how can scientists shy away from it rather than basically tell the public, okay, you care about it, we are here putting some effort in that direction, rather than, demonstrating that we are smart? I mean, that's not the correct objective.
You're onto something, and it's not just within the academic communities. We see this with anyone that's essentially developing technology. We have, frankly, pretty good technology, but all we do is advance the technology, but we're not advancing ourselves, right? It's like if I think about supersymmetry as an advancement of mathematics in some sort of sense, all we've done is advance some sort of very small niche area that doesn't help the totality of human understanding, but just a small bit. It's all well and good that we've advanced our rockets, but it doesn't help us advance who we are in our own evolution. And you see it in marketing. You see it with, product manufacturing, automobiles. You're advancing the technology, but people aren't becoming better drivers, right? People aren't understanding the root of the issues. And when I look at that, it's like our focus is so much on these other things that really aren't helping our preservation, understanding, or advancement of ourselves.
Right. No. So the point is there are some important existential issues that affect human life, and we should focus on those first. What matters to people. And the way I see it, it's just like driving in the highway. And, there are various exits that you can take. Now, it's true that 100 years ago, scientists took some exits, and we can drill down that side roads, and all the way, we might get to a dead end, or we might continue along those niches. And of course, that was celebrated for a century. And these are the kinds of things that people have done, since quantum mechanics was developed, since Einstein's theory of general relativity was developed. So we can continue the same path of following those exits that were taken already. But instead, if we step back, we can ask, okay, which are the exits from the highway that really would affect our future? And perhaps we have not taken them yet. And, that's the strategic thinking. You have to have a broad view of human existence to decide, what are the questions that really matter. But instead, scientists are pretty much guided by what will gain respect within the existing intellectual landscape of science. So if you are a young physicist entering theoretical physics, and you see a lot of senior faculty arguing, in 10 dimensions, you can unify quantum mechanics and gravity, and then they measure each other by how well you can do the mathematics. And so then you follow that path and you just do the mathematics, but you don't think strategically. Otherwise, you won't get a job. You have to drill in the same direction that others have carved already. And my point is, it's really the blame of the senior people that have tenure in academia. And what tenure means is that you have job security, so you can think broadly, rather than focusing on how to get honors and awards by promoting your own image. That's not the issue. The issue is, what are we supposed to work on? You see, that's the bigger issue. And I got to an age where, I don't care much about what other people say. I don't care how many likes I have on Twitter. So I basically gave up on those motivations that most people have. And, I don't care if I will not get any prize in my lifetime anymore. That's not the issue. I can celebrate prizes, but then I will end up eventually dead without contributing anything to the rest of humanity. On the other hand, if I focus on a question that matters for the future, that's a bigger reward as far as I'm concerned. It's not about me personally, it's about the future of humanity. See,
right.
So that's what guides me right now. That's what makes me different. That's what brings me into friction with my colleagues.
Well, so let's consider this, and let's think about this logically here, Avi. For instance, Chichen Itza. If I was on the outside looking at Earth, and I would say, where did that community go? Why did they disappear? Okay? Super string theory did not help them. Trying to predict when a war was going to occur did not predict their preservation. They're no longer there. The only thing that stands is the stone they stacked into their temples and pyramids within that relative area. But when I look at us and our own preservation, there's nothing, if I was to view us from the outside, to say, what are we doing in our own understanding to find that preservation?
Exactly.
Where do we go? Why are we not looking at the things closest to us, right? Where were their mistakes? Why is it that the atmosphere of Mars failed? Was it through, some sort of intervention of other individuals that were smarter kids on the block and screwed up? What is it that we should be looking at?
Yeah, that's an excellent point, because, what really shapes our future is reality. We live in a reality. Now, for example, The reality that we live in is that the earth moves around the sun. Now, when Galileo tried to suggest that, at the time, people thought, no, the earth is at the center, everything moves around it. And so the philosophers refused to look through his telescope, put him in house arrest. But that only maintained their ignorance. And today we design space missions based on the idea that the earth moves around the sun. We know that for a fact. So reality continues to be stubborn. It doesn't care what philosophers do. And today they would have canceled Galileo on social media, but who cares? So my point is, for the goal of preservation, the one that you define, it's really important to side with reality. And it's not a popularity contest. I don't care how many likes an idea gets on Twitter. What really matters is how much evidence there is to support it, and how can we get more evidence to support it. That's really the guiding principle. And if there is evidence that looks anomalous, we should get even more evidence to check what it means. So in the case of Oumuamua, that's my suggestion. Let's monitor, let's get a high resolution image of a future object that doesn't look like a comet or an asteroid, rather than denying that it's different from what we have seen before. And by the way, those that deny it do not pay attention to the fact that whoever tried to explain it as something that we've never seen before, like a hydrogen iceberg and nitrogen iceberg. How can you have those explanations as the prevailing explanations for natural origin of something that we have never seen before, if it is something that we should have seen before, like many people claim, or it's natural? The point is, if it's nothing we have seen before, we should get more data, because something is wrong with the way we think about the problem. That's all I'm saying. It's just like a caveman finding a cell phone and saying, the cell phone is a rock of a type that I've never seen before. But of course, it's the beginning of a learning experience, and he could press a button and record his voice, press another button, record his image. Then it will be clear that it's not a cell phone. So my point is, we should learn by getting more evidence. Evidence is the key, not how many likes or dislikes are expressed towards an idea or a person. And that's the way by which we can preserve ourselves. And just imagine that, consider the solar system as a mailbox, okay? And imagine that we have packages arriving to the mailbox. It's just that we are not checking them, because the people that are supposed to check our mailbox say, we don't want to check the mailbox unless there is extraordinary evidence that forces us to check the mailbox. There is no mail there. And obviously it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's a circular argument, because if you don't walk to the mailbox, if you are lazy enough not to invest any funds in the search, then you will never find it. And then you will continue to be ignorant, but not looking through our windows, it will not get rid of our neighbors. That's my point. They might be out there. And so the tragic fact could be that, it's just like a love letter that you find in the attic when its time has passed. If you don't check your mailbox for a package, you might lose an opportunity to learn something that would help to save the human species in the future, and if we don't check the mail, we might be losing that message. So my point is, this is existential. It's not just a question of figuring out that the dark matter is made of weakly interacting massive particles. Who cares? That will not affect my daily life in any way. Here I'm talking about a question that could affect the future of humanity. So how dare we even shy away from it, ridicule it, not fund it at all?
Well, then let me ask, I got to ask you something now. And this is very specific to what you're talking about, especially when it says, going into funding specific projects. Data is the reality. Unless the instruments are flat out lying, you have this very agnostic thing that is observing essentially our reality around us. Now, this data is then brought over to those who thought that this is how the world was working through their own sort of perspective, essentially from a lack of information. As we move forward in time, there's an increase in information. So the likelihood that something offsets your previous theories is bound to happen. So why is it that data in that sense is so threatening to the paradigm which people hold?
Oh, because people prefer see it as basically they see new data that invalidates what they assumed as a threat to their ego. Once again, we're going back to the ego. So there was a lecture about Oumuamua at Harvard, and when I left the auditorium with a colleague of mine, he said, Oumuamua is so weird, I wish it never existed. And that statement means that it doesn't conform with what I expected, and therefore I would prefer that it didn't exist. So instead of a scientist celebrating the fact that nature is educating us about something new, many people resist it because they want to believe that they already know everything. And if something appears that is unknown, that threatens their ego, because it means that they don't have a complete knowledge. What they believed in is not necessarily true. And moreover, maybe someone else discovered it. So how dare this other person get credit for something that they could have gotten credit for? And that jealousy also plays a role. So you put all of these together, it all stems from the ego. And if you put the ego aside and you just say, I'm trying to learn something about nature, because I'm not pretending that I know much more. The most vivid memory that I have from childhood is sitting at dinner and asking a question and then realizing that all the adults in the room pretend that they know much more than they actually do. And that was the good experience. The bad experience would be when the adults would simply dismiss the question and not, just put it to the side and say, we don't want to discuss it, and move on to their comfort zone. And I thought that by entering science, I will be surrounded by people similar to me that would like to know what's out there and answer every question. But unfortunately, I have a similar experience where a lot of people pretend that they know more than they actually know with respect to Oumuamua, for example, and many of them dismiss the question. And that's unfortunate, because the purpose of science is supposed to be uh, open-mindedness towards discovering what the world is about without prejudice.
Right. And listen, no offense to anybody. And I've been lucky enough to speak with individuals with great titles across many different backgrounds. And what I've come to realize, and truthfully, no offense to anyone, is that we know so much about so little. And when I've seen that after talking to these experts, it's like, why is it that there's all this grandiose, applause and, media attention and all these things around, ideas or theories or speech that people get emotionally sucked into, but it doesn't really help them understand. And I feel like it's not really broadening the full understanding that we need, so that when we look at nature, we look at the data it gives us, that we can actually absorb it without any sort of false perspective or false sort of reality that we've kind of drilled ourselves into. And it's sad that when I look through this, that everyone thinks we're all high and mighty, but from what I understand, and I've talked to quite a bit of people, there really isn't much that's actually known. It's a lot of guessing. It's a lot of people armchair quarterbacking, thinking that they
Right.
know better, but the second the data comes in and says otherwise, they either drop back, nobody wants to talk about it, or they're badmouth it until it no longer exists. And
Right.
frankly, I think that's a shame if they don't want to
Yeah.
understand each other
I
or the
think
others and themselves.
yeah, the correct approach is to admit that what we know is an island in an ocean of ignorance. And once again, we are not almighty. We are not the main player here. Nature is much richer than our imagination. And, once you adopt this sense of modesty, everything else falls into place. And, let's just figure out what the world is about. Let's not assume we have no neighbors. Let's also not assume we are the smartest kid on the block. Let's just go out and search and figure it out. And anyone that shares my view should join the Galileo Project.
And if they want to find out more about the Galileo project, where would they search for something like that?
Just put in Google the Galileo Project, Harvard University, Avi Loeb, and you will get to the website. Also, if you go to my professional website, I have opinion essays, commentaries every few days, every week, where I describe aspects of the Galileo Project, so you can keep up to date by going to the opinion essays on my professional website.
No, that's fabulous. Avi, thank you for coming on here and having this discussion about our own preservation as human beings, because the way I look at it in a probabilistic format, there's not a chance we're the only kids on the block. And so I appreciate you coming in and sharing that sort of perspective with me.
Thank you. And if I had to, I was asked in a forum, how much longer do we have as a civilization? And I said, when you pick a random day during your life, there is a chance of 1 in 10,000 that it would be the first day of your life after you are born, because that's one day out of tens of thousands of days in the life of an adult. And, we have lived through 1 century of technological advancement. And you might say, okay, maybe we will survive for 1 million years. Well, the chance of that is 1 in 10,000, because 1 million years is 10,000 times longer than a century. And I would say it's much more likely that we would survive only a few more centuries, that we are sort of in the midst of our technological lifespan. And, that's a very depressing thought, that we don't have a lot of time left. But if we continue to behave the way we do, which means focusing on ourselves, not focusing on learning about the world, not being modest enough to correct ourselves, in the way we decide about policy, then that's really what we have left. So my hope is that somehow we would recognize the risk in doing that, from changing the climate on the planet, from misbehaving towards each other, from the way we behave in academia, ridiculing existential questions that are of great importance to society. If we don't correct our course, indeed we have only a few centuries left.
No, I couldn't agree more. I don't think it's bleak, but I think it's actually realistic, and hopefully that wakes everybody up. So, Avi, thank you very much for coming on again. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.